in the faculty side for 5. And so before that, I was in the K-12 system. So I ran a teen parenting program. So Dr. Wiest.
Hello, everyone. Courtney Wiest. I'm the graduate director here at St. Leo University. And as Candace was saying, in our program, students are really introduced to self-care at an early point in their curriculum, because it's essential as social workers when we get into the field that we have a way of managing our work-life balance, because we do hear a lot of stories. We work with vulnerable people on an ongoing basis, and it takes a toll. So it's something that we really impress upon our students from the beginning, because it's not something you can just decide, okay, I'm burnt out now, I need to do something. You have to have an ongoing plan. And that starts in graduate school. And it's difficult for them sometimes because they say, we don't have time, we're students, but that's when they have to figure out how to make the time. And probably in every course that we teach, there's some kind of element of self-care, also reflection, because that's part of self-care. So we're here today to kind of share some of that information, but also we each have a little bit different advice and spin that we'll give to it. I'm going to share some specific tips and strategies that I use in my life and that have been very helpful over the last 2 years, obviously, with everything being disrupted. So hopefully you guys will find it some takeaways, but also we'd like to have a conversation with you at the end, really to get input from you as well. Dr. Campbell?
Thanks, Courtney. Welcome, everybody. Mike Campbell. I'm the Associate Director of the MSW program, so I work with both Rob and Courtney. One of the things I think that the three of us share in common is that we have all worked clinically with folks who have stress management, and on some level, I think this issue of work-life balance is an issue of stress and stress management. Everyone, regardless of age, has issues around stress and the management of stress. So hopefully we can talk about some various strategies that we both counsel our students and one another on the balance that we can try and strike with the whole work-life focus. I've been with the university for 6 years. Prior to my time with St. Leo, I was on faculty at UCF in the College of Medicine and School of Social Work, and also was the senior administrative director for behavioral health for a children's hospital. So I take a slightly different view of work-life balance, having spent decades and decades working in the corporate sector, and how work-life balance looks there compared to how it looks in the academy. And maybe we can share some similar ideas of ways that it gets translated to our work. So look forward to not only sharing some information with you, but recognizing that work-life balance is a personal struggle for all of us at various times. And we hope that there's an opportunity for us to share with one another strategies that we've used, or ask one another questions so that we can each hopefully walk away from this with maybe a clearer direction for how we want to define our own personal strategy for work-life balance. So Dr. Wiest, I'll bounce it back to you, and then ultimately we'll look forward to talking about it at the end.
Yeah, we're gonna let Dr. Lucio get us started. He's gonna share, and then I'll share, and then Dr. Campbell will wrap up with conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Wiest, Dr. Campbell, and again, thank you, Candace, for bringing this together and letting us have this conversation. I think it's interesting because we talk as social workers. I can just speak as our profession about self-care all the time, and we tend to be the worst at taking care of ourselves, right? We preach a lot of do this, do this, do this, and then we don't do it. And so, rather than specific strategies, I'm just going to talk a little bit about just thinking differently about self-care. Because I think sometimes we think, well, if I just do this, that's sort of the magic solution. If I just learn how to do this activity. And I think sometimes if we think differently about what is even self-care and what is work-life balance, I think it changes our own internal conversation and reflection around it. So I do a lot of work with K-12 as well. And, this has been an incredibly difficult time for K-12, and everybody thought once they got through the pandemic that everything would be easier. And from my friends in K-12, they told me it's the worst year they've ever had in their lives in K-12. And we're seeing the highest exit of teachers and social workers from K-12 than even during the pandemic. And so there's this sense of I don't want to say it's just like overwhelmingness and anxiety. And I think now they're talking about screening for anxiety starting at age 6 and above, I think is what they recommended, right, for all youth and adults to be screened for anxiety. And so I'll start to say is I think if you think that, I'm stressed and I need to do something because I'm stressed, my perspective is it's too late. You've already passed the place where you need to do self-care. And so as we think about self-care for me, it's thinking about what is that balance for yourself, and then thinking about how do I achieve that before I get stressed, right? If you say, well, I'm so stressed, I need yoga, you're already on the road to burnout, right? And so how do you think about self-care that you put things in place so that you can do if it's yoga, if it's those things, but long before it becomes a problem? So how do you organize your life in a way that makes sense and allows that to happen? And so, I think it's first off figuring out and reflecting on what is balance for you. I mean, I've worked with people and I've had a previous boss whose hobby was work, and that's what made him happy, and perfectly great for him. It's not my hobby. Sorry, Dr. Wiest, right? But my hobby is not work. And when I'm out of here, I'm out of here. And when I retire, I will not be one of those people who comes back to teach adjunct, right? I'm done when I'm done. But that's my perspective. It's not the same as everybody else. And we have to figure out for ourselves what is that balance? Is it family? What's most important to you? And maybe it is work. Maybe it is publications. Maybe it is, getting this promotion. But figuring that out first and then working around that. Because if you say, well, my importance is family and all you're doing is working, well, then you're really going to be stressed and everything's going to. So I think first and foremost is really thinking about what that balance looks like and then recognizing that. And so finding that fit for you and I always say, right, I always mention, what do they always mention? Yoga, meditation. There are other things to mention, right? That you should always do these things. And maybe they work and maybe they don't. I know when I do meditation, I don't know about you guys, but when I meditate, I'm worse off than when I started, right? Because the whole time I'm meditating, I'm thinking, why can't I meditate if this is what I should be doing to clear my mind? And everything, it's just not my thing, right? And so that's okay. Just finding those things that are your thing. So for me, driving and biking are my two sort of Zen spaces, right? And when I do those, I sort of think the best. I do, and that's my Zen space. They're trying to figure out how to do those. For other people, it might be reading. For somebody, it might be activities with friends. It might be getting involved in groups. It might be a hobby. It might be volunteering your time. Doesn't really matter, but it takes active planning to first off think about what is the thing for you that decompresses you, right? And again, I always say, like, when I'm grading, wine might be the thing, right, to get through some of the papers, but recognizing that's not the long-term solution either, right? It's before. And so then trying to figure out how to make that happen. And I think that's the biggest challenge, because we say, I'm going to do this, and then it never happens. And so I can just speak for me, and I block off time in my calendar. And so if I'm going to go so I teach at night generally. And so, so I have to manage my time effectively. And so I'll put it in my calendar, because if I don't put it in my calendar, somebody will invariably put a meeting, right? And so if I don't have it blocked up, I'm like, well, I'll go for a bike ride today. And then a meeting comes up and it's like, well, I'll go a little later and I'll go a little later. And next thing I know, it's tomorrow already, and I'll start my day tomorrow. And so for me, I found that blocking that time to do that activity works for me. I know other people who block off time in the morning, and I like to read. And so the first 2 hours, I don't even check my email. I read. And again, we could talk about strategies all day. Check your email twice a day, I think is what some people say. Other people say don't put them. It's just finding out what really that balance is for you and what works for you. Because what works for me is certainly not going to work for everybody else. I'm sure when you think about like going for a bike ride, it's like, well, I don't want to get run over in traffic, and therefore I'm more stressed, and that's okay. Right? We all don't have to do those things, but really just finding what works for you. And, for me, there's two books that I think were sort of life-changing when it came to that. And so number one was Essentialism by Greg McNown. And it's a fantastic book if you've not read it. It's a pretty short read. And it really just speaks to figuring out what those really critical things in your life are and shedding everything else. And the argument is that if I spend 5 minutes doing something outside of what's important to me, that's 5 minutes I can't dedicate to what's important. And that might seem like a small thing, but over a week, that might add up to 3 or 4 hours of time, that we're not doing the things that we deem important, that we deem essential and critical. And then the other one would be atomic habits. And that's just simply sort of, and yeah, I'll share them in the chat when I'm done. Atomic habits is just, again, a way of thinking about how do we make those incremental changes so they keep and we stick to them. And so those are the two sort of big things for me that I sort of think are my life-changing things. And every time I get sort of, when things start to feel out of control, I start to think back, am I doing those things that are really critical to get me to where I want to be? And that's not to say when I'm working, I won't be doing the best job that I can. But for me, I know what I want out of life at this moment, and that may change and reevaluate that. But trying to figure out how to make that happen is, I think, to me, the biggest challenge, because it's so easy to say, I'll start this tomorrow or I'll start this later. So, I wish there were an easy way to just put on the every weekend, I could just put on the out of office email, right? That it comes up on Friday at 5 and reopens back up on Monday. And maybe that's something I'll think about, right? It's just going to I wish there was an automatic way to set it. I think you have to manually set it, like you can set your time, but I don't think that's one. That would be a nice one to set, right? And then it's my choice if I want to send, something later. So like with Outlook, I send, if I send something, if I actually do something on the weekend, I'll send it to send later. So I'll send it to send on Monday, because I don't want someone thinking I'm going to respond immediately on a weekend. And so even though I might write it on the weekend, they don't need to know that. So, because again, if they know that, then suddenly I'm going to get requests on the weekend with the expectation that I'll do that. So that's my piece. It's just really thinking differently about what self-care and what work-life balance means to you, figuring out what are those important things and how do you make them happen. And if we can do that, then I think, but if we wait, that's when we get burnout and we leave the profession. And like I said, we're seeing this, I don't think higher ed's going to get any easier. I don't know if anybody read the paper today, and they said, it was the worst learning gains in English and math in the last, 30 years or something like that, the biggest drop. And so, so that's coming our way. And that's not to say those students don't need the help, but it's going to add to the level of our stress and the level of that we need Amy to come in and teach things for us about APA and things. So that's just coming our way. And if we're not ready for that, that's going to be something that we're going to see that's just going to be stressful for us too. So we're trying to figure out how do we get in front of it rather than let it take hold of us. So that's my piece. And I'll put in the chat those books, and we'll be open for obviously questions when we're done. Yeah. Dr. Wiest?
Thank you, Dr. Lucio. Candace, can you do the share screen? I wanted to share some PowerPoints, really just to kind of keep you guys entertained as I talk. Many of the things that Dr. Lucio hit on are things I'm going to ask you to reflect on as well as we discuss. But as I'm pulling up the PowerPoint, you guys have taken time on a Monday at lunch to come and talk with us. Share with us in the chat, or you can just speak out. What brought you here today? What are some things that you're struggling with, or maybe you've accomplished work-life balance and you can share with us? Write something in the chat so we can have a little conversation as we get going with this. So I call this work-life unbalance. The last 2 years, I don't know about you, but I felt like I'm in a snow globe, and that every once in a while somebody comes by and shakes me, something new has happened, and I just can't get back on my feet. And I'm going to echo a lot of what Dr. Lucio said. I think those are guiding principles that in our profession we really try to live by, is this idea that you have to have a plan and strategies before you get so stressed out that you're needing a life raft. You have to have that plan. Now, the last 3 years, I think we've all really had to rely on our resources, if we have them, and others to help support us, because it's been such a unprecedented events that have occurred. So it's important that we are really continuing to use those things. So the first thing I say is, what is self-care? And this is kind of what Dr. Lucy was talking about, this idea of, I go get a pedicure, I'm relaxing in the pool, those type of things, or the facial. And those are all good things to be doing. And I enjoy doing those things too. But I want to challenge you to really think about things you do beforehand, and just principles that guide your life to help you stay balanced the best you can. When stressful situations come up, life events, it's going to throw you off balance. So you're going to have to lean on those things to help you. And the things that I'll cover are your why. boundaries, prioritizing, take risk, and find joy and humor. Those are things that I really kind of live by and help guide me to keep some kind of balance in my life. So like Dr. Lucy was saying, your why, it could be work, it could be activities. For me, it's my family. So you can see the pictures of my kids here. They're all under the age of middle school and below. So they're young. And what I say with your why is think about things that you have on your calendar. And these are the things you don't want to miss. I can miss things at work, and I hate to say it, we are replaceable, right? But in their lives, if I miss something, I'm not replaceable. So I really, remind myself that what I'm doing is for them, for my family, and there's important events that I need to be present for in their life as they grow up. So really identify your why. And Dr. Lucio said that too. What drives you? Is it work? Is it family? Is it something else? But you need to know that, and that needs to guide you in what you do and the decisions you make and setting up your priorities. And then saying no. It's really important to learn to say no. So you can always focus on your why. People are going to, ask you to do a lot of different things. But if you have your guiding principles, your why, you've got to say no to certain things to help keep a balance. And that's okay. And so learning how to set that boundary and say no is really important. And that's tough nowadays. I think with technology, it's so easy to get bombarded with emails and texts and requests, and your time gets split smaller and smaller. I know with the pandemic, a lot of us were already working from home, but then we had our kids at home, or we had other family members at home, and we just got really stretched then. So you might have to say no to some things, and that might be work, it might be friends, it might be other things in your life, but it's okay to say no and to practice saying no regularly. And then my next one is prioritizing. So make sure you're prioritizing what's important to you. If it's family, work, really making sure you're doing that. And I always say you can't, drink from an empty cup. You can't pour from an empty cup. So what helps you fill your cup up? Dr. Lucy was talking about, biking and in the car, riding in the car. Some people it's meditation. Some people it's reading. I personally really enjoy running and working out. So I find time in my day to make sure I get those activities in, to prioritize my self-care daily, so that I can be service to my family, service to my students, to my colleagues. Because if I don't do that, then I'm not going to be able to have a full cup to be able to give back. So it's really important to make sure you're prioritizing what fills your cup every day, whatever that is that you need to be doing, and not waiting till your cup is empty. So make sure you're filling that cup on a daily basis. And then it's always important to remember this is your journey. I think it's so easy, especially in academia, to compare yourself to other people that you're working with, or that are going for promotion, or they're writing more. But this is your journey. And when you remember your why, your journey is going to look different than somebody else's journey. So set your goals to be better than yourself the next day, and don't get caught up in what everyone else is focused on. Focus on what your journey is and where you're going. And that really helps keep you on the right path and remembering that why. So that's something I keep in my mind, because my journey is very different than one of my colleagues' journey. And it's important for me to stay focused on that. And then I always say, take risk. So learn to do something new every day, every week. Try something different. If it's a new book, challenge yourself to be bad at something. So it really gives you a chance to have humility. 4 years ago, I started doing CrossFit, and I'm bad every day I go to do CrossFit, because there's always something new and heavier weight, something challenging me. So challenge yourself to be bad at something. That's okay. I think it stretches you. Do a new activity, find a new hobby. It keeps things fresh and adventurous for you. So I encourage you to find that time regularly to do something that really gives you a new adventure in life, new zest. And then always laugh and find humor in life. Be around people that are going to help you laugh in tough situations. We have regular meetings, and sometimes we just are laughing at really difficult situations because there's nothing else we can do. I mean, we're working hard. All of us are really working hard. And you just have to have humor sometimes to lighten the load. So laugh every day, find something that brings you joy. And it really will help when things get challenging. And these are things that I try to live by regularly, because if I don't, then I get too stressed out and I'm at that point where I need a life raft and I'm just struggling. So those are kind of my guiding principles. Hopefully the slides entertained you and kept you focused at what we're talking about. But I want to let Dr. Campbell share, and then we can have a conversation. Dr. Campbell?
Thanks, Dr. Wiest. So interestingly, we had a conversation as faculty within the last few weeks. And part of the conversation was just about the students that we're working with and sort of a perception on our part of generational divides on looking at the issue of accountability and work ethic. And I'm sure if you ask yourself the question about your work ethic compared to the student that you're teaching, it's probably not far for you to get to the same place that we did about, like, well, why can't they just take some accountability with their work? Why don't they, why aren't they proactive like we are? And one of the things that sort of stimulated for us was a discussion just about perception, right? And so I have like three concepts that I want to just sort of throw out there. And one has to do with the social contract in employment. So I had a conversation with a colleague of mine who's a pediatrician, and we were talking about workforce evolution, and this is work-life balance. So I'll try and keep it germane to that conversation, right? And the idea that employer and employee relationships have shifted over time. My prior employer was one of the last to offer pensions. So if that speaks anything to folks about pension sort of had a really clear indication of employer caring for employee just do your job and then your employer will take care of you. And that was a generation of folks who might work for one employer for 40 plus years. And that wasn't an uncommon situation. That was actually the norm. That's very different than the situation that we live in today, where folks are, I think the average is 3 to 5 years that folks are with an employer. And the expectation, so that's the social contract, the expectation from employer to employee, and who's responsible for really looking out for my welfare. I mean, ultimately it's us, obviously, but that pendulum has really shifted more to the employee from the employer just because of the social contract and the evolution over time. That doesn't change the fact that when I first entered the workforce, it was sort of a different model, and that model has shifted over the last decades that I'm not going to speak out loud about, but like that has shifted over time. And so this issue of work-life balance becomes relevant. And I think we look at it from different perspectives, depending upon when we entered the workforce and what we have our perspectives around. My daughter, who's 20 and is, up in school in Tallahassee, she doesn't really have any issue pulling out of one employer and going to another employer if she doesn't think that she's being treated fairly or compensated appropriately or blah, 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 blah. Whereas I look at it like, are you kidding? You got to work these things out. This is part of, but there's a generational sort of shift around the transactional nature of employer, employee, or student, teacher. I mean, sure, we see that in terms of expectations around grade inflation and the like. So I just want to throw out the idea of the social contract, and I want you to I challenge you to think through what your vision is of that social contract and where the responsibility lies in work-life balance. And do you see that with your employer, and it's the expectation of the employer to provide that for you? Is the expectation on you, or more likely it's on some continuum in between? And where you fall on that makes it more challenging for us to think about how do we try and achieve work-life balance. Right. Okay. So that's that one. So social contract, that's one concept. I'm curious for feedback from you guys. Second concept that I want to throw out is an idea that was pushed in the late 90s, early 2000s by Jack Groppel, who wrote the book, The Corporate Athlete. Let me just. I think I muted myself. Can you hear me now? Okay. So Jack wrote this book about the corporate athlete, and the essential thesis of this book is this idea of energy balance, right? The energy is a finite resource. We only have so much of it. And when we give energy on to our employer, we take it away from our family. When we give it to our family, we take it away from our employer. Not that it's not bi-directional, right? Because there are things that we do to invest in ourselves. And when we invest in ourselves, and we're not investing in our family, when we're investing in our family. So this idea of energy is distributed by us. We choose where we distribute and manage our energy. And they were championing this idea. It's really a wellness idea, right? Around how we manage diet, how we manage sleep, how we manage exercise, how and where we put our energy into our efforts. And they offered the idea, and this may resonate for some of you, that stress is really a great opportunity for us to practice where we choose to use that energy. And I know many folks would say that as timelines approach, they feel more focused and more able to achieve, because they work better under pressure. Pressure is a stress analog. So the fact that we have stress in our lives and in our work is by design, because we have things that we have to either build or services that we have to render. And the way that we manage our energy can have a profound influence on the way that we are successful in that effort on work-life balance. And I'm a big believer that work-life balance isn't a destination. So for those of you who say, "Oh, I'm not good at work-life balance," I think it's really more an issue of it's a process that we can assess daily or weekly or monthly, but we'll never achieve work-life balance. Like, that's a fallacy. The idea that we're going to have work-life balance is, if you hit it, congratulations, it's a good day, because tomorrow's coming and it's probably not going to be as balanced as it was today. Or if it's off balance today, there's hope for tomorrow that it might be more balanced, right? And I think that's it. To me, the idea of work-life balance is this aspirational idea that we make efforts to work towards, but we never really ever achieve it. And I don't think that's not necessarily the goal. The goal is for us to continue to strive to do a better job of managing our energy so that we achieve a greater sense of balance. So energy balance is the second concept that I want to throw at you. And Grapple does a really nice job of sort of framing it. The other thing that happens with some of these books is, like, here's like the 21 steps, which is what Grapple has to like achieving this corporate athlete thing, which that's great, gives you some markers, but to Rob and Courtney's point, I think that's a personal decision, and I think that's an elusive end target. So I think we should just be thinking about the process rather than the end point, and then managing that balance is a little bit better. The other concept that I want to throw at you guys is that it's impossible for anyone to mandate or legislate or set self-governed targets on anyone, and they're all going to work. So if I have a system that achieves a better sense of balance for me, that's a system of one. And again, I challenge that tomorrow it may not work as well as it did today or the day after. Right? I was in a meeting at the hospital with other senior leaders, and I was talking with a rheumatologist. She's brilliant, probably one of the most brilliant women that I've ever met. And we had an organizational psychologist talking with us about the importance of work-life balance. And they were going over all of these strategies that different firms use to try and help their leaders to achieve work-life balance. And one that they were harping on maybe I should check my words. One that they were sort of touting at the time was this idea that you don't respond to email on the weekends, and that you only give yourself, like Rob said, two times during the day when you manage email, and that way you manage the email doesn't manage you, which conceptually sounds great, but but Terry took like extreme exception to the idea that someone's going to tell her when and how she should manage her email. If other people are getting stressed out over managing their email over the weekend, that's their problem. They need to figure it out, because I'm pretty good with managing my email when and where I do, and I have a decent set of boundaries. So when Courtney talked about boundaries in her talk, I remember that conversation with her, because part of what I was hearing her say was that no one can dictate to us how we achieve work-life balance, just like it can't be mandated on us. it's part of our own decision-making process. And I really think that the idea of internal versus external motivators for work-life balance becomes really relevant, right? So social contract is helpful because I think it gives us sort of a concept for how we look at the employer-employee relationship. Corporate athlete is a really nice text to give us some context around energy and energy balance and where we use it, and recognizing that we only have so much of it, and where we choose to invest it is just that, it's an investment. And Terry reminds me how important it is for me to know that people can't tell me how to manage my that balance. I need to electively choose that for myself. And that plan, to Courtney's point, is a plan that evolves. And the things that work for me now or don't work for me now need to evolve and shift as time goes on. This issue of email wasn't the thing when I first jumped into the workforce. I mean, I was still AOL dial-up. You didn't have access. Like, the idea that you could have a computer, on your head, I thought was fallacy. And why would anyone even need the internet on their phone anyway? It's only for calling people. And now we sit in a place where, like, the blurred boundary between work and not work, there is no. I was responding to emails and doing work while I was sitting on field side for my son while he was playing lacrosse over the weekend. And I don't begrudge that. I think it's pretty awesome that I can manage email from the side of the field while I'm watching lacrosse and hanging out with my son. But I know that there are times when that phone gets turned off and goes away because I'm with my son. Where I managed my energy in that moment was balanced. And the more times that I choose to find balance in my work, the better it is for me. And I think the better it is, for the folks that I work with and around. And by work, I'm using the big umbrella work, whether that's working with my colleagues at St. Leo or working with my family at home. So there's sort of like the entree to now a conversation around work-life balance. I think the other thing that Terry reminds us is that no one is an expert on work-life balance. And so Dr. Weiss, Dr. Lucio, and myself, we don't purport to be experts on work-life balance. One of the things that people often turn to us for is counsel and dialogue. And so we see our role as facilitator in this moment, to facilitate, hopefully bring you guys some ideas, maybe some books or references or things that you can consider in thinking about how you invest energy in the work-life balance triangle. And I'd be open for us to have just some dialogue and discussion about concepts around work-life balance and things that, what brought you here. Hopefully you got some of the things that you were looking for. I saw some of you guys were outlining areas where you feel like you have some issues with that energy balance, and we'd be happy to just have an open conversation. And I'll be the first one to admit that I don't do a great job of work-life balance every day, but I do aspire to do a better job today than I did yesterday. That's sort of my promise to me. And more importantly, my promise to my wife and my kids and, the people that are with me, because they will be with me well after I'm at St. Leo. And I think that's where I find my balance, but that's me. So open to hear from you guys, questions or comments, feedback, things that we can talk about together as a team to help one another to achieve a better sense of work-life balance and managing our energy.
I think one of the things that I hear you saying, all three of you, is that nobody but I can decide to take charge of my work-life balance. It's really easy to blame our situation, whether that's our employer or our boss or whatever it is, for my work-life balance issues. But in the end, it's choices that I make. And I remember when I was chair, I was so out of balance. It wasn't unusual to work 70 hours a week. That's crazy. And but nobody told me I had to work 70 hours a week. It was just there was always more work to do. The job was impossible. Courtney, I'm sure you can relate to this. You're probably managing it much better than me. And at that time in my life, my kids were both in college and graduate school. My husband was an avid woodworker and was happy to be in his shop. creating all sorts of things. And he was incredibly patient and tolerant with me. So it was easy. I didn't have 3-year-olds at home. It was easy to slip into that 60 and 70-hour work week. But I regretted that because I missed the joy of all of the other things that should have been in my life. And I wasn't bitter about it. I was exhausted, but I think I had to own that was my choice. I could have done a less than stellar job. I could have done a good job, and I should have been satisfied with that. And so I think we have to take responsibility for the decisions we make. And sometimes that means disappointing a colleague or a boss or whatever. And that doesn't work. If that creates undue stress and pressure, then it might be that it's not the right fit for me. It might be that I should have some other work or some other place to work. So I'm not saying it's always an easy decision and that I should, that it's always my fault or whatever. The expectations may be unrealistic, but I think we have to sort through what is my responsibility and what I can control and what I'm willing to put up with, in making those decisions. And I was incredibly blessed that I had a really patient, supportive husband. It could have cost me my marriage working 60 or 70 hours a week. That's crazy. Who puts up with that? Anyway, I think you're talking about responsibility and that no one can put it on us, and that what doesn't work, what works for other people that wouldn't necessarily work for us. All of those things come into play in this self-analysis of saying, where am I right now in work-life balance, and what am I going to do about
it? Yeah, Candace, I'll respond to that too, because I also think that no one tells you don't have to work those hours either, right? Nobody says, oh, don't get this done. It's okay if it waits till Monday, right? And so I think that's that balance is there's always the demands will keep coming unless we set the boundaries. And I get that, but no one also says, hey, Candace, you seem to be working really hard at this position. I really want you to take a break. It's okay that you don't get this back to me until Monday. So I do think there's this sort of piece of it that, that's like unwritten, like, well, yes, no one's telling us, but no one's either telling us not to, right? And so, we have to also listen to our colleagues and and those kinds of things to say, maybe it is okay. Like if I send an email on a Friday, it's because I'm thinking about it, but maybe it's on me to say, I don't need this till next week. You don't need to rush on the weekend. I just want to get it out because I'm thinking about it, right? But if I get something from Courtney on a Friday, my thought is, well, she needs this right away. Otherwise, she wouldn't have sent it. And that may not be her intent, but the implied message is, it's sent on a Friday, I need it right away, right? So I guess there is a balance. And I do agree, we have to take control of it, but our organizations aren't helping by saying, it's okay, hey, take a little break, right? If you go to take a sabbatical, the first thing people will be like is, are you sure you need to take a sabbatical? We're short on faculty, right? Yeah. And so, there's always sort of an implied, oh, well, that was just a joke. Anyway, so I just say that to say is, yes, we need to own it, but our organizations don't help with the guilt that we feel toward it, I guess would be what I would say.
Yeah, no, I think you have a really good point. I think there were times when I wished my supervisor would have not just recognized the hours, but said, hey, this isn't good. This isn't healthy. I care more about you than the work. And I think that also communicates to us the importance of us supporting each other and us saying to each other, are you sure you need, that you want to do that? Are you, especially if we're in supervisory positions, to say, no, I don't want you to work on the weekend. And I think in some ways that really prepared me to be a supervisor, having lived through that, because I don't want to be that supervisor. But regardless of whether we're in a supervisory position or not, as a colleague, I owe it to my colleagues to model for them work-life balance, to celebrate when they choose boundaries and not be critical of that, not judge that. And I think all of us contributing to that environment where we're supportive of each other, not judgmental because I didn't get what I needed when I needed it or whatever. I think that's an important responsibility too.
Absolutely. And I think, technology is a wonderful thing, but it's, offers that opportunity, like Dr. Campbell said, to be able to be at a football game with your son or a game and, manage emails, but it also is always with us. So that's why I think it's good for all of us to be mindful of how we manage that time. I really try not to send emails on the weekend. Sometimes, faculty do email me and I'll respond, but I try not to send that stuff because I know then they're on the other end and they're busy with their families or their weekend time, and there's this pressure, right? So I think, Candace, you bring up a good point, being mindful, all of us, of how do we help support each other in balancing time, because it's challenging sometimes. It is. Anyone else have thoughts, feedback?
I just wanted to highlight in the chat. I dropped a really interesting article that Forbes put out post-COVID. So another thing I think that's important for us to remember, not realize, but just really sort of draw attention to, is that we're 100+ years ago was the last pandemic. So we're in uncharted times. Now we're post-pandemic in an information age where accessibility is everywhere. So it probably shouldn't be shocking to us that we all feel a certain amount of burnout because we just endured a pandemic. And so it's impacted all of us in ways that we should probably just recognize that we've all been managing a certain amount of stress that we've never experienced before, and hopefully, likely, will never experience again. And recognizing that this idea of work-life balance pre-COVID and post-COVID is of significantly different dialogue. The issue of social contract remains prescient, though, and the Forbes article is really interesting because it really sort of like hits at, from an employer perspective, recognizing that if employers allow the pendulum to swing so far, I mean, to Rob and Candace, to your point, that with the expectation is that somebody else be looking out for me, that would be our employer, our boss, or the institution. That's where that social contract is, the relationship between employer employee and how we manage that. And I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to just take ownership of the parts that are ours, whether we're in a supervisory role or not. That we do things that can contribute to the betterment, and we also take away. It's the whole energy thing. It's interesting. And yeah, you're right, Georgina. It's not like if you don't answer your email that the faucet stops and no more email comes in. You just wait, and now you've got a big pile of email to deal with when you open them back up. And I think you're right. There's been a lot of that. That pressure sort of builds up.
I think another thing that maybe we haven't all considered kind of as a society, but information is growing exponentially, and our ability to take in that information or to sort through it, we're really not being given some of the tools and skills that we need to deal with that. I think that's something our society is going to have to look at pretty soon, because there's so much out there, and then to try and figure out, well, what's true and what's misinformation, all of that takes more and more time, more and more effort. So I think that's also part of what's causing stress in our society in general.
Yeah, Amy, it's funny. So I'm a social worker, but I'm like an anti-social media social worker. I have never participated in social media, never felt it was relevant. Like, if I really need to talk to somebody, I can call them. I don't care really what you had for dinner last night and a picture of your, I just don't, and that's me, right? And I thought, oh, what a great thing. I've by not engaging in social media, I don't have to put up with that stuff, and I can take that social media energy and place it somewhere else. That came at a cost, because I don't realize that there's an entire ecosystem of communication that happens in a social media space, and I don't participate in any of it. I have no idea what that dialogue and discussion is, which is whether that's political or social. You're absolutely right. That whole social space. I still don't participate in it, but I recognize that all information overload is there. Yeah. Anyway, that's a great comment, Amy.
Yeah, and also just, I think Amy brings a good point. Even when we have emails that come through, it's like this, we don't even have time to digest fully our responses sometimes because we have to get them out in a certain amount of time. But there are some emails, particularly for students with complicated situations, that I do take 24 hours to 48 hours to respond because I need to really think about what my response is, instead of just putting a quick response out. But it's challenging because I know that person's waiting for a response. I have other things coming in, and it does become taxing. Yeah, Dr. Campbell's not on social media. We have to send him pictures of stuff if we want him to see something on social media.
So what exactly is a meme? I'm trying to understand. I'm not that agnostic to it, but I certainly, I agree with you. That there just is there's a lot coming at us. I think the whole idea that drinking from a fire hose is sort of what that information exchange is all about, and trying to figure out how to balance where we pay attention and where we put our focus is critical, and can be a drain if we don't manage it, I think, appropriately.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, Michael, as a librarian, I've also gotten off most of the social media because it's too much. It's not hitting, I guess, the areas that I feel like I need information. Like you said, I don't need to know what you ate for dinner last night. So I've tried to kind of take some of that junk food social stuff out so that I can have real social interaction. But I think what I'm finding with my kids who are high school and college age is that they really need work on their social skills, that they lost them in the pandemic.
Yeah, good point, Amy. It's funny. I remember my wife and I, before we had kids, we were at a restaurant, and there was a kid. So I'm gonna date myself when I say this. That comes walking in with his family, and he's got his headphones on, right? Not AirPods, earbuds, whatever. And I said, oh my gosh, that's ridiculous. You're gonna have your headphones on in a family dinner, like I mean, maybe he had other challenges with noise or other things that I could have been more conscientious about. But I think that the way that we consume content and the way that we engage people is completely different. It's completely different, and trying to find ways, on ramps, Amy, for meaningful communication, meaningful social interaction, not junk food social interactions. I've never heard it put that way, but I think that's fantastic, especially if you think about diet as one of our one of the ways that we can help manage that balance. Junk food social is a good idea about how to manage that. I'm curious if I know we've only got a few more minutes. Anybody else comments or thoughts about the discussion about achieving work-life balance that you want to make sure we talk about?
I know just for me, it's day to day. Like when I think of work-life balance, and sometimes hour to hour, sometimes minute to minute, how you just kind of go in and out, and for me, getting distracted on things where, you seem like you're focused, and then all of a sudden there's other distractions that happen, and sometimes when I get home, because I have 3 kids, 2 in high school, 1 in middle school. And so keeping that stuff busy as well, and working a couple days a week from home, kind of makes it so, you turn it on and off, and then sometimes I'm up till 11 or 12 o'clock, maybe working on something. And so being able to figure out that balance, and then the priority, for me, trying to prioritize things helps me, and trying to refocus, because I might get distracted, and it's not necessarily work, even just other stuff that distracts you. And then figure out where my priorities are, and especially for my kids. My wife and I were talking about, we have one that's a senior now, and next year she's going to be going away to school, and it's kind of like, oh, wow. And in a few more months, she'll be leaving, and so you start to think about that kind of stuff as a parent. And it gives you a different perspective as well, and reprioritizing and refocusing, that sort of thing. And so hopefully, each day, the reminders of where are the most important things in our life, and where can we focus those on, can help me as far as my work-life balance.
Absolutely, Greg. And because those moments you can't get back when she leaves. Those moments are there. So spend as much time you can soaking them in. We appreciate you guys letting us come and share today. And certainly, if you have questions, you can reach out to us. We had two other colleagues from undergrad, Dr. Perez and Professor Kazanov was going to come share, but they had an event, I think, that got rescheduled on campus too. So Dr. Perez really focuses on healthy eating and those habits. So that would be something that maybe in the future she could share with you as well. So it's really just an ongoing process. I mean, it's not one thing. It's personal, and you have to be always working at it to find the best balance you can. And I think Greg brought up a good point. Sometimes it's daily, hourly, whatever that is, and just making sure you're focusing on what's the priority for you in your life.
Just a closing thought. I think one of the challenges for many of us is we think what we do matters. We think what we do has an impact on other people. And so when we see opportunities to do it better or to do it well, we feel compelled to do that. And I think St. Leo has a way of drawing people in who believe that there's something bigger than themselves. And so we tend to feel selfish when we try to take care of ourselves. We feel guilty that we do less than what's possible. And I know I have struggled with that personally, and knowing when to say that's enough, that's good enough for now. So I think being aware of some of those dynamics and giving ourselves permission to take care of ourselves, and realizing the importance of that work-life balance. And what you said earlier, Courtney, about you can't pour out of an empty cup. Sooner or later, that cup is going to get empty. And anyway, so I really can't thank you enough for sharing your insights today and starting this really important conversation, helping equip us with some ideas and maybe even a little bit of inspiration to do better for ourselves. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, right, Michael. Putting the oxygen on yourself first. So true.
Yeah, if we don't take care of ourselves, then we can't be there to take care of others, whether that's family or students or colleagues. And to me, that's the grounding message. And rather than investing a lot of energy to say, I coulda, shoulda, woulda. Just what am I going to do next? Revisionist history is not a great use of energy. So just what am I going to do next to do a better job? I appreciate everyone being here. Maybe hopefully this was an investment that was in self-care. Good to see everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.